I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You are the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. We're going to talk about a tough subject today. We're going to talk about trauma and all the emotions, the necessary healing that goes with it. And as I was discussing with my guest before, trauma is trauma. And she said there's no trauma Olympics. So wherever you're at, it's real. But today's guest is not just someone who studied this in theory. She is a licensed professional counselor. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She does work in this area. She does a podcast and radio program, so you can hear more from her. But she is someone who has lived through a really horrific circumstance, and she talks about that in a book that just came out this summer. It's called Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. It looks just like this. It's available wherever you get books. And it's written by Kimberly Haar. And she joins us today to talk not just about her story, but to give you some hope if you're struggling in this area. And if you know someone who is still hurting from some past trauma, and I don't care if you think of it as big trauma or little trauma. Again, trauma is trauma. We all need healing. Hit that share button and let them know, hey, here's someone who gets it, who's worked through it, who can help you, who can walk with you through it, because that's the goal. That's why we're here. Kimberly, welcome to Life Today Live. Great to see you today.
Thank you, Randy. It is such an honor to be here.
So we talked a little bit pre-program about some common denominators, and I learned that you grew up in a strong Christian family. Give us a little bit of your background, because, I mean, I think that's an important issue too, because we do wonder, why do good people go through bad things? But give us an idea kind of the pre-traumatic Kimberly.
Sure. Well, I was actually born in Canada, and I was raised in what I like to say is a greenhouse of faith, because at the age of 5, I gave my life to Jesus and I never looked back. Mm-hmm. There were never times when I walked away from the Lord. And I was raised in a home that my family produced children's Bible story books and tapes. And so I always knew to cling to Jesus. We moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma when I was 7 years old. So I am a U.S. citizen. And this is where I've made my home for the last 53 years.
So we share a little bit of commonality in Oral Roberts University. Both spent time there. After you graduated, did you go straight into the counseling? Is this an area you always were interested in?
No, I actually went to Oral Roberts University to be a school teacher. And I went a couple of years, but then I ended up working for a family company. I got married. I had 4 children, and I did not go back to school to become a therapist until I was 37 years old. Okay. So I became a therapist as an adult at 40, and I'm now 59. So that's how long I've been doing this. And I became a therapist because my first husband and I actually had marriage problems, and I didn't feel like we were getting much help. And so I decided someday I'm going to go back and I'm going to become a hope giver.
Yeah. So sadly, that's not uncommon in the church. What was that like working through that? I mean, because, you know, when you grow up in a Christian family, you expect a Christian fairy tale marriage, and it doesn't always work out that way. And that right there is very difficult, you know, having children too, you know, divorce impacts children. What were you working through at the time?
Right. You know, I was actually, my first marriage, we were married 23 years. And during that time, you're right, it was a Christian marriage. We went to church every Sunday. We were reading the Bible. We had kids. We were raising them to love the Lord. But my ex-husband was continually unfaithful with like one-night stands or pornography. And because we had children, I made the decision to stay in my marriage because I didn't want my children to go back and forth between 2 homes. But when I recognized in 2013, I realized my ex-husband was actually in an affair. And I decided at that point it was time for me to end my marriage. And as a Christian woman, that was probably, even to this day, I would say that's the hardest decision I have ever in my life had to make. But I did make that. And in 2013, I was divorced.
Okay, so a lot of people, that's a difficult one for people in the church. When you deal with this, I mean, is there a right and wrong answer, or is it case by case? How do you approach that?
You know, I think even as a therapist, I think that it is absolutely case by case, because there are many marriages that go through infidelities that are strong, that God restores, redeems. I think the important thing is you've got to have two people that are wanting to work at it. And so, unfortunately, too many times you've got well-meaning people that don't know the situation, that give bad advice or tell you if you are in a home with abuse or violence, or they give a pat answer of God restores. And I had stood and I had asked the Lord to restore my marriage, and so it was godly counsel that was like, okay, if he is not going to change, it's time to go.
Yeah, God does restore, but God also protects.
That's right. There's boundaries. I do want to say that there was no domestic violence in my marriage during the time of my 23 years, because I know that I am billed as a domestic violence survivor. All it takes is one time, and we're going to get into that kind of in my story.
Yeah, well, go ahead, because that's where it takes a dark turn.
It does. When I divorced in 2013, my youngest children were 15 years old. And I decided that for 4 years, until they graduated from high school and they went to college, I was going to be a full-time I was going to just raise them and be a single mom. And so in 2017, I woke up and I just felt a stirring in my heart that said, this is the year I was going to be married again. And so I had originally told my ex-husband, in the 4 years, I'm not going to date anybody. And if you radically change your life, get your life right with the Lord, we can revisit this situation. But that had not happened. And so in 2017, I began to date, and I met a man on April Fool's Day, and his name was Andrew, and he was an engineer. And I knew from the moment I met him, I knew this was the person I was going to marry. And it was kind of funny because we had dated maybe 2 weeks, and he looked at me and he said, I asked Google how long I need to know somebody before I know I'm in love. And that is definitely his engineer brain, because he wanted to make sure that he was very logical. And so he told me, he said, I want to marry you. And so for 4 weeks, we saw each other almost every day. We both knew we were going to be married, and we're just kind of on that path. And so during this time, it had been about 4 weeks, and my ex-husband called me and he asked me to come to his home to talk to him about our adult children. And that had happened many times because we had a friendly divorce. And this time when I went over to his apartment, he told me that he was wanting me to give him another chance for us to get back together. And I just told him, I said, I've moved on. I said, I have been dating somebody seriously, and I just think you need to as well. And he looked down at me and he said, well, maybe I'm just going to have to go have a talk with that man. And it didn't make sense to me because I had never talked to him about him. I didn't know he knew who he was or where he lived, but I would later learn that my ex-husband had been stalking me. And so when I left his apartment that evening, I called Andrew and I said, can I stop by just for a few minutes? I wanted to just give him a heads up that my ex-husband might, harass him, might make a rumor up about me. And I said, Andrew, would you fight for me? And he said, well, of course I would. And when I asked him why, he said, because I was worth it. And so little did I know that within 24 hours, Andrew was going to be fighting not just for me, but he was going to be fighting for his life. What happened is that night when I went home, I locked my front door to my house because I was empty nesting, living by myself. But when I went upstairs to my bedroom, something stirred in me and said, lock your bedroom door. I wasn't scared. I'd been rattled that evening, but I wasn't scared. So I locked my door. I went to sleep. And at 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door crashing down off the hinges. And my ex-husband was intoxicated. He had broke into my home and he had a gun in his hand. And for the next 4 hours, I was assaulted. After that, he told me for punishment for ruining his life, he was going to kidnap me and he was going to make me watch him as he murdered Andrew.
Oh.
So I went in the vehicle, prayed for Andrew the whole way. By this time, it was about 6:30 in the morning. And when we got to Andrew's house, my ex-husband reached into the back seat of the vehicle, got the gun, got the extra bullets, but he looked at me and he said, "Now you go do what you need to do." And so I jumped into the driver's seat. I was making a getaway to go get some help, but I saw my ex-husband mount the 3 steps to the front door that had a lead glass window, and I heard 3 gunshots, and I knew there was no way Andrew was going to survive this.
Geez. What was your conversation with God at that point? Was it strictly pleading for help, or did you? I mean, do you remember what you were thinking during that? Because that
I do. When my bedroom door crashed down off the hinges, I awoke with a start, but I was very alert, and it's almost like I had a gift of calm. I was afraid, but I had a gift of calm. And under my breath, I just prayed and said, "Dear God, please keep me alive because my family's going to need me." And then I really literally told myself, okay, just container all of your emotions, all of your thoughts, stay very in tune to what he's saying because you've got to keep yourself alive. And so I really knew at one point, I knew God was right there with me. Right after I had been assaulted, I was laying on my bed and I was very scared. I didn't know if I was going to die, but all of a sudden I felt a presence in the room. And it was like I recognized the presence was the presence of the Lord. And it was like he was holding my hand and like he was saying, "Okay, I'm not going anywhere. I am right here with you." And Psalm 23 just became so real to me of, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm with you." And so I knew from that moment, I knew God was there with me.
Well, and I will fear no evil, and you were facing an evil situation. All right. There's all sorts of questions come up there when it relates to God, and we do that.
Yeah.
But what happened then with your ex-husband and Andrew?
Sure. Well, I escaped to a nearby super center and I ran in. At this time, I was bloody faced. I was unrecognizable. And I just screamed at the top of my lungs, "Call 911." And the cashiers didn't seem to be going as fast as I thought they should. And I looked down in my hand and I had a cell phone in my hand that was not mine. So I must have grabbed it from the vehicle. And so I called 911 and I told the police, or I told the dispatcher, I said, "Tell the police to be careful because this isn't going to end good." And once I knew that 911 was on the way, the police were coming to get me with an ambulance, I finally knew I was safe. And at that point, all the emotions began to kind of rush in. So I was taken to an emergency room. And I learned that's where Andrew had an adult son that called my cell phone. And my adult daughter by this time was there and she answered it. And his son said, "My dad was shot 10 times. He said he's in and out of surgery. We don't know if he's going to make it. We're sorry this happened to your mom. We wish them well, but we just think we just need to part ways and they need to go separate ways."
Yeah.
And so I would learn, like I said, that Andrew had been shot 10 times. We were in 2 different hospitals. I could not find him because he was under an assumed name because it was a crime scene.
Yeah.
And so I would not hear from Andrew for about 5 to 6 weeks, although I would hear from him again.
So he survived.
He did survive. He survived. And, I right away went to my mom and dad's. I spent the night at my mom and dad's house for a couple nights so I wouldn't have to go back to my house. And I had an aunt and an uncle that had a home in South Tulsa. And they told me, they said, "You know what? We want to gift you our home," because they were going to Canada for the summer. And they were giving me a tour of their backyard. And there was just this most beautiful big pergola with wood rafters, 2 big swings, a big cement floor. And something inside me, I knew that this is where I was going to go in the mornings and I was going to meet Jesus there. I was going to start to heal there. And that became a very holy place for me until it was like 5 or 6 weeks later, Andrew reached back out to me and we reconnected.
So is this who you're married to today?
It is.
Is that his picture on the website?
That is his. Okay. That is his. Isn't he cute?
Well, okay, I'll let the audience be a judge for themselves. We're looking at KimberlyHaar.com, by the way, and that's her and Andrew right there.
Yes,
so he looks
reached
well.
Out. He is. He's had about 13 surgeries. Oh. You would never know it by looking at him. He has a titanium arm now. He's got a lot of metal in his arm. He should have died because he was hit in the femoral artery. But God was really with him through his healing of the physical wounds. For me, there was all the emotional wounds. But I think it was 5 weeks later, and I looked down at my cell phone, and there was a message from Andrew. And it said, "Hey, I'm alive." And, what do you say to that? Right. I was said, I'm so excited. I'm so sorry. But I asked if I could go see him, and he said no. He said, I'm getting ready for another surgery. And he goes, "I'll contact you after the surgery, but take care." And I thought, what do you mean take care? What does that mean? Does that mean, you go your way, I'll go mine? And so it was about another 4 or 5 days, and he reached out and he said a visit would be nice, but I needed to sneak up to the hospital when his kids weren't there, his adult kids. So here I'm 50 years old. I'm sneaking around the adult kids. I walked into his hospital room and I said, "Andrew, where does this leave us?" And he said, "I don't know." He goes, "I've read the felony counts." He goes, "I know you're going to be messed up." He goes, "I know what happened to me and I'm going to be messed up." And I looked at him. I shook my finger in his face and I said, "Andrew Haar, you will never meet another woman like me." And 4 weeks later, we were engaged, and 4 months later, we were married. And it's now been 8 years. It has been an amazing 8 years, but it has been quite the adventure.
Yeah, it has been, which takes me again to the title of the book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. And both of you were hurt deeply. Y'all were both a mess, and I'm guessing that's a whole part of the process. I do have to ask, what happened to your ex-husband?
He did go to prison for a very long time.
Okay, so where do you go from there? I mean, obviously, you need a little time to physically heal. And now you've just got trauma all over the place. It's not just the two of you that have been traumatized. I mean, this is all over the place. How do you even pick yourselves up and what do you do?
In the very first, those 5 to 6 weeks when I didn't hear from Andrew, in the beginning, I would lay on that cement floor and I would wrap myself in a big green blanket and I would just weep. And I wept and I wept, and I had to I felt so much grief and anger and frustration and questions with the Lord. And then I kind of got into control mode, and I began telling all my friends, this is what you need to pray, how you need to pray, get me on every prayer chain. And we're going to pray. Andrew has a Kim-shaped hole in his heart. And I told the Lord, but I trust you, Lord. And I would tell the Lord what he should do, when he should do it, how he should do it. And I think we do that so often with what we want and say, "Okay, Lord, bless my plans." And I had to get real, and I had to tell the Lord I was afraid to trust him. I said, "Lord, what if you don't give me what I want?" And I finally got to a place where I said, "God, I'm going to surrender. I surrender my dreams, my plans, and I'm going to choose to trust you." And there was a beautiful, especially during those weeks when I was apart from Andrew, I told the Lord how I was hurting and how I was angry and how I felt abandoned. And, the Lord just welcomed all those questions. And it was like wrapping me in his arms, because God's not mad at us when we're upset. And he just loved and said, "I know." He knew I was hurting. And so there was grieving, there was forgiveness, it didn't just all happen during those 6 weeks, but that's actually when it began.
So, one of the biggest reasons that people don't believe in God or trust God or even walk away is because of evil, the presence of evil. And what you faced that day was evil. And you can say, both of our lives were spared, so there's something good in that. But it still goes back to the question of God's goodness. And if you don't believe God's a good God, you can't trust in that God. How did you work through that? Because that's a big one.
I think that there was, especially because I was raised and I had relationship with the Lord, it's like I knew that God was a good God, though I didn't feel it. And lots of times there's the question, where is God when bad things happen?
Yep.
Why does God allow it? But we live in a fallen world and there is human will. And my ex-husband had human will. And I will tell you that I actually did have the protection of the Lord on me when I had that stirring the night before that said, lock your bedroom door.
Yeah.
That woke me up, because had I not woken up, I don't know that I would be here today.
Yeah.
And God was there every step of the way, because sometimes I think of Jacob in the Bible when he wrestled with the angel, and the next day he says, surely the presence of the Lord was in this place and I didn't even realize it. And everywhere I looked around, it was like God may not have shown up in the way I expected him to or the way I wanted him to, but God was all around, in friends that would text me late at night and say, I'm praying for you, in people that would drop off meals, in finances that came in, favor with my job. It was really grappling with God. I am going to choose to trust you. I'm going to choose to trust that you're still a good God. I'm going to praise you. It's like I say, a sacrifice of praise is when we can lift our hands when our heart is heavy. And it was a choice to say, God, I'm going to trust you.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a choice. And now the question that's not on the sheet. Are you ready for this one? Since we both,
I'm ready.
You live in Tulsa. I know what Tulsa's like.
I do.
And I love Tulsa, by the way. I'll be there soon. But, and both of us have crossed paths at Oral Roberts University. I'm not going to pin this idea on anybody there,
Sure.
but it is prevalent in your community, I know, and in others. But the idea, well, there's either no theology of suffering or there's a very bad theology of suffering, and it leads to, when things like this happen, you start to either point blame. Oh, well, see, Kimberly, you are doing this wrong, or disillusionment with God, and I just don't think either of those are correct. Did this impact your theology in the way of suffering that you hadn't really had to think about?
I think it impacted me in that I knew that there's all these questions about there's hard things around the world, but the Bible talks over and over again about there are hard things we're going to go through.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think people forget that. And when we go through hard things, we blame God. And so my spirituality, my relationship with the Lord was more, yes, I walked through pain and suffering, and God walked alongside it with me. So the promise was I wouldn't be alone. And the healing was not just linear. Sometimes it was a few steps forward and one step back. And I had to walk through a lot, but I made a decision early on that we can become very bitter when hard things happen to us.
Yeah.
And, there's a story in the Bible about Naomi, a woman. Her and her husband have two sons, and they leave to go to Bethlehem to raise their two sons. They grow up, and over the period of time, Naomi's husband and both of her sons die. And Naomi takes one daughter-in-law back to Bethlehem, and when they greet her and they say, Naomi's here, and they're excited, Naomi makes a statement, and she goes, God took me out plentiful, but he brought me back empty. So she's blaming God about the afflictions on her. And she goes, from now on, my name will be Mara, which means bitter. And she changed her name to the past and to her circumstances. And I knew from the very beginning, and some of this is because I am a therapist, and I've walked the journey alongside many people as they are healing. And we have choices of, am I going to let this make me bitter? Or am I going to move forward? And I knew from the very first day, no matter what it took, I was going to heal. I talk a little bit about forgiveness, but the day everything happened, my ex-husband looked down at me after the 4 hours of assault. The intoxication was wearing off. And he looked at me and he said, tell me the truth. You could never forgive me. I've gone too far. And where in my mind, I was like, I couldn't believe he was even saying that to me after those 4 hours. I stopped and I thought, and I looked at him, but I made a declaration and I said, you're right. You've gone too far. There's no going back. I said, but this day I'll tell you, I will forgive you. And it doesn't mean I forgave him that day. It doesn't mean it was easy or it was instantaneous, but I knew that this was going to be, I was not going to stay angry, bitter, resentful, hurt, because no one would have blamed me for maintaining that I was a victim. And when I would go to the victim witness center, I would actually go down to the courthouse because it was a crime scene. And there was a piece of paper that would say, victim sign here. And I knew when I signed, something would rise up in me. And I decided I was victimized. Yeah. But that will not be the end of my story.
That's good. That's powerful. You know, we talk a lot about being overcomers, but then we think when something bad happens, like, what's wrong? No, this is what we talk about. Overcoming the worst of the worst. And that's the mentality right there. Okay. Let me give people a couple of resources, because if you want to follow up with Kimberly, I want to take you back to the website. This is KimberlyHaar.com. If you're listening instead of watching, Haar is Haar. So KimberlyHaar.com. And she has a podcast there. Was Keeping It Real? Is that what it's called?
It is.
Podcast. So, I mean, there's some resources. Look, if you're struggling through this, you're thinking, great for her, but what about me? Follow up with her and just let her speak into your life a little bit more. So here's where I want to end, Kimberly, though, and no rush, no hurry. And I know that we're just going to skim the surface, but for anyone who is watching this because they have been traumatized, they've asked the questions that you asked, they're still asking them, and they want to be healed, but you can't just create your own healing always, you know? Where do you start with them to give them hope that they can no longer be a victim? They can forgive. Yeah. They can be whole again. Where do you begin?
Well, let me say this, that no story is too broken that there's not redemption and restoration available. And the first place to start is to start wherever you're at and start small. That next right step, I suggest surround yourself, get some community around you, because when something hard happens, we tend to want to isolate and pull away. But that's exactly what the devil wants us to do, so he can get us to partner with his lies that say, my life is over, I'll never get better, God doesn't love me. And so get some trusted community, whether that's your church, a licensed Christian therapist, good friends that can encourage you. So start where you're at. Don't let people rush your healing, because sometimes people will say things like, aren't you over this by now? So don't rush your healing, but instead of running from God, run to him. Yeah. Because he will meet you with everything that you bring to him, just the love that he gives you and the restoration that's available. I like to say that when I was, first met Andrew, I felt like Princess Cinderella from Disney. But then I felt like Humpty Dumpty, because I felt like I had fallen off the wall and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put me back together again. But then I ran to the King of Kings. And the King of Kings, God specializes in picking up our broken pieces. And so I tried to incorporate that in the book that I wrote. There's like 10 therapeutic tools that talk about the power of community, prayer, the power of self-care. There is some practical tools, that I try to offer as a therapist, in addition to just my story.
Oh, that's good. It's tough. If you're watching and I hope you hear her. The book, the website are good tools for you. And as she says, don't rush the healing, but let it begin today. And if you're doubting God's goodness, Psalm says, come, taste and see that the Lord is good. You're going to have to taste it for yourself. You're going to have to find out for yourself. But both of us are testifying, and I've talked to so many other people that have been through horrific situations. God is good. He really is, but you're going to have to experience it for yourself. And he wants you to. He's not hiding. He's waiting there for you.
That's right.
Anything else you want to add, Kimberly? So, thank you for telling the story. I know it's hard. I know that there's still trauma out there. You're still having to pick up some pieces here and there. It's an ongoing thing. But I appreciate you stepping out and discussing this for the sake of others.
I think just like you said, it is ongoing. It's layer by layer by layer. And whenever you get triggered by something, it's just another opportunity to begin another layer of healing. But life is good. God is good. God is good. And you can smile again.
There you go. Hold on to that from someone who knows, you can smile again. Appreciate you guys being here. Again, if you know someone that needs to hear this, hit the share button, kindly nudge them. If you haven't liked, followed, or subscribed here, please do that. We'll bring you more encouragement. And you can pick up Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts wherever you get books. Follow up with Kimberly. Let the healing begin. See you next time.
We float on the vast, limitless sea of divine mercy.